This is a lesson on memory and the objectives are with reference to short-term and long-term memory, explain some of the possible causes of memory loss, e.g. trauma and aging. You can do other things than that because it says e.g. You can pick whatever you want, but I'm going to go through two particular things in this PowerPoint and describe and evaluate some of the techniques used to improve memory or to halt deterioration in memory. So there are three techniques that are covered in this slideshow, but again, you can do other ones if you choose to. So aging and memory. So we know basically because of stereotypes and because of the world around us that the aging affects memory. Think how does it affect memory? But it does affect some parts of the memory more than others, whereas some parts of memory stay relatively constant as you age. So, as I said, with reference to short-term and long-term memory, explain some of the possible causes of memory loss, e.g. trauma and aging. We're going to talk about aging, first of all. So, although both verbal and visual memory tend to decline with age, the decline is far from dramatic. So, some types of memory drop relatively little in terms of their effectiveness over the span of a lifetime, and also spatial span using the Corsi block tapping task, which is a type of research where you tap blocks in a particular order, drops from 5.1 to 4.7 blocks. So that those types of memory, verbal, visual memory, spatial span, are not dropping that much over the course of a lifetime, whereas others do drop quite a lot. Also, Crack found a minimal drop in memory span for unrelated words in the elderly, a difference that increased substantially when the task was changed to one in which the words had to be recalled in alphabetical order. So basically, if you had to process the words a little bit more, then that was dropping off the scores quite a lot. So if you heard pen, dog, zoo, hat, and you had to recall dog, hat, pen, zoo in alphabetical order, that would make a big difference to the elderly. And that is probably because you need to simultaneously hold and manipulate the material to use your working memory. So it seems that working memory declines as you get older. The actual processing that you have to do in your working memory declines as you get older. Whereas sentence span, in which participants must process a sequence of sentences and then recall the final word, does tend to be sensitive to aging, the pattern of results is less marked than one might expect. So, three researchers review the range of studies of the effects of age on working memory, concluding that a decrement occurs but is rather small. And three other researchers suggest that this decline could largely be the result of the buildup of interference from earlier sequences, reflecting a problem with inhibiting irrelevant material rather than one of combining storage and processing per se. So basically, one thing that they seem to have found about the memory and aging is that older people seem to find it difficult to inhibit irrelevant information. So they'll get distracted by things around them, whereas younger people are much more able to put on those blinkers and concentrate on the matter at hand. And other research, Hasher and Zaks, has found that is the major cognitive effect of aging. The inability to inhibit irrelevant stimuli, which is interesting really, because if you get a student who's older, in the 50s or 60s or whatever, they would find it more difficult to learn because they're more easily distracted. Also, one aspect of memory that declines with aging is episodic memory. Episodic memory does decline through the adult years. One thing we could think about is the material that's used in studies relatively artificial, such as remembering pairs of unrelated words, but this effect does not seem to be limited to such material. So, for example, the Doors and People test ask people to remember names, pictures of doors, and that shows a decline for both recall and recognition of visual and verbal materials. And also another test called the Rivermead Behavioural Memory Test, which is designed to mirror everyday situations, showed a similar decline. And basically, they found the episodic memory declined because there's a decline in episodic memory per se, but also two other things were connected to that. One being processing capacity, and the other was the level of environmental support provided during the retrieval. So, if the researchers were prodding them a little bit more, they would remember more. So, elderly people might have it there in the memory, but might find it more difficult to recall that information. There is another hypothesis called the associative deficit hypothesis. The proposal that the age deficit in memory comes from an impaired capacity to form associations between previously unrelated stimuli. So that's what memory is to a certain extent. You use your memory, your working memory, to make associations between two things that were previously unrelated. And apparently that might be something that declines significantly with age. Also, prospective memory. Prospective memory is essentially planning something. So if you say, I'm going to go out with my mates next Wednesday, and you forget to go, that's a failure in your progressive memory. As we get older, we do seem to complain more about that sort of stuff, but are we less reliable, or is there something else going on? Prospective memory, by the way, does not refer to any particular type of memory, so it maps onto different forms of memory. But in order to perform a prospective memory task, it's necessary to encode two things. The first is the action to be performed. The second is the time or event when that action must be retrieved. So you've got to remember the fact that you've got to go out with your mates next Wednesday, and then next Wednesday you've got to remember that thing. So it's quite a complex thing that you're doing in your mind. Given that the material and retrieval plan have been adequately encoded, it is then necessary to maintain this information over a delay and perform the relevant action at an appropriate time. In certain lab-based tasks, continuous active maintenance might be possible while performing the concurrent task, provided that the participants have sufficient working memory capacity. So basically, if you're in a lab environment, you will be able to say, I've got to meet my friends next Wednesday, I've got to do this next in an hour. But in real world situations, it's not necessarily the same as that. So it's difficult to test this because, you can't repeat to yourself until next Wednesday, must meet friends next Wednesday, must meet friends next Wednesday. Other things are going on that are going to get in the way of that thing. So one strategy that people use for keeping their memory from declining with age is practicing. So use it or lose it. So, if you practice more, if you do Sudoku every day, or you do maths every day, or brain training, or whatever, brain gym, will that help your memory preserve as you get older? Individual differences do become more marked as people get older, probably for a number of different reasons. Decline in health could be one of them. That could be genetic, or it could be linked to your lifestyle. It does appear that if you eat more healthy and you take exercise and remain mentally active, that those things do help, and your memory will decline less. However, that's not necessarily the case, because they did some research in which they compared university professors and blue-collar workers in Sweden, and they found essentially no difference. So it doesn't necessarily mean that use it or lose it is a good theory. So there's some information about aging, and obviously that is one of the the reasons for memory loss. Another one is trauma, illness, which could cause amnesia. So most of us know what amnesia is. And stereotypically we just think people forget things. But obviously for us, we are thinking about the particular types of memory that are affected and things like that. So pure amnesia is an organic brain syndrome characterized by impairment in episodic memory with either an anterograde or sometimes a retrograde loss of memories. So you can either have a loss of being able to process memories that you can then remember in the future, or a loss of memories from the past. Episodic memory, the ability to recognize and remember episodes from your life, is most often impaired, but semantic memory, immediate memory, and procedural memory are preserved. So you can still remember facts, you can still remember things that have immediately happened, and you can still remember how to do things in most cases, though that is not necessarily the case in all situations. So anterograde amnesia refers to the difficulty storing or retrieving ongoing information that can be used in the future. And that's what the prefix antero means. Retrograde amnesia refers to the loss of access to events that happened in the past, typically before the onset of the disease. So one's about not being able to store things that you can use in the future, and the second thing is not being able to remember things that happened in the past, probably earlier than the accident or whatever happened to result in your amnesia. One of the biggest impacts of amnesia is the grossly impaired episodic memory. Working memory, semantic memory, implicit memory, and intelligence are most often preserved. However, there could be other things that happen when people have amnesia. So it's not necessarily just episodic memory that is impacted, but most often episodic memory is something that's a real problem or issue with people with amnesia. So they might not remember, where they're from, or their school days, or their wedding, or things like that. Why? Early hypotheses included greater susceptibility to interference, leading to a retrieval deficit. So, you wouldn't be able to remember things because something was happening to stop you being able to store it in your long-term memory. Maybe it's an incapacity for deep processing. But all of these did run into problems in the future research. And it is too soon to reject the possibility of faster forgetting and a susceptibility to interference. So, working memory is preserved. So it might just be the case that people with amnesia forget more quickly and it doesn't get stored in long-term memory, and hence why they cannot remember things to use in the future. But whatever the precise mechanism is, it seems that basically what amnesiacs have is an inability to associate an event with a specific context. So for example, if you got married 10 years ago, you might remember that you got married in St. Matthew's Church, and you can associate your wedding with that and then bring those two events together in your memory. It seems to be that people with amnesia find that difficult, and that is the key thing. So someone with amnesia might remember that they got married. They might remember a church called St. Matthew's, but they won't be able to contextualize those two things and put them together in their memory. And there's a lot of research on that is in the textbook that I've sent you and in the activities that I've asked you to do as part of this presentation. But Tulving says that episodic memory is a form of mental time travel. Amnesiacs struggle with that. So, if you remember your wedding, you go back in time, to the place, and you pair it with your wedding. People with amnesia cannot do that in the same way. They seem to be able to have the components somewhere in their memory, but cannot maybe integrate them into a whole. Retrograde amnesia is where people have an impairment in autobiographical memory on both the personal and the semantic scales. So they'll not be able to remember facts about their life, both personal to them and wider facts about their life as well. But you do get differential impairment. So there was a case of an Italian woman. She couldn't remember anything, no public events. She couldn't remember the war that she'd lived through, nor the assassination of the Prime Minister. But she did remember Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer's wedding. And she called her a scheming girl, just like the one that married her own son. So basically, she got this public event and she personalised it, so she could remember that, which is quite interesting. So next and final thing for memory is about the techniques to improve memory. So there are two more. Obviously, we've just studied and looked at use it or lose it. Method of loci. Okay, method of loci essentially means pairing something that you want to remember with a location. So that's what loci means. So for example, if you are trying to remember 10 words, you can remember those words by pairing them with every step of your journey to work. So I passed the post office. I want to remember a red ball or something like that. The method of loci is often very effective. Bauer compared recall of 5 lists of 20 nouns each for groups using or not using the method of loci. The former group recalled 72% of the nouns on average against 28% for the latter, so it seems to be very effective. And it does depend on the locations that are actually used. So route to work is better than one inside the participant's home. Why is that? It could be because your work route is generally consistent, so you might go the same way every time, so you compare it with something and then memorize those things. Whereas as you're walking around your home, you don't go, I'm going to go in the bathroom, then I'm going to go down the stairs, then I'm going to go in the living room. It doesn't necessarily work like that. The second strategy for improving memory, and obviously there's lots more research on this sort of thing, so you would be expected to find other research as well as the ones that I've presented to you on this slide. Mnemonics. Okay, so mnemonics apparently have existed for thousands of years, and they mostly in the past related to visual imagery. But after the Puritans, who apparently used verbal systems, because they thought visual imagery was wicked and liable to give rise to depraved carnal affections, people started using verbal mnemonics. We will all have heard of a verbal mnemonic because Roy G. Biv, Richard of York gave battle in vain. That's a famous one that we may have remembered from school. I remember many violinists eat marmalade jam sandwiches under netball posts for the names of the planets, Mars, Venus, etc. Medical students learning anatomy, often use verbal mnemonics to assist them, to remember the organs or the names of the bones of the body and things like that. One of the best known anatomy mnemonics refers to the names of the cranial nerves, and old Olympia's towering top at A fin and German volt and hop. Apparently that helps, which seems a bit of a complicated one, but we all know a mnemonic, and and we've all probably used one in school to remember a particular thing in our GCSEs or something like that. Apparently, one of the most effective verbal mnemonics is a story mnemonic. So what we do is we get a series of unrelated words and we link them in order using a story. So we write a story and then we can remember those words in a particular order. What's the evidence for that? Bauer and Clark showed that they can be really, really effective. So participants were instructed to recall 12 lists of 10 nouns each in the correct order and given the first words of each list as cues. People who'd done the story mnemonic remembered 93% of the words compared to 13% of those who did not. And there was a mnemonist called Chow Lu who has recited pi to more places than anyone else. And apparently he uses in his memory recall the story mnemonic, and he was asked to learn 40 words in order, and he recalled 100% of them after only having spent 9 or 10 seconds learning each word. He mentally arranged the words into eight groups of 5, constructed a vivid story at each given location for each group. So it was very effective in that case. Okay, so that's the memory unit. In this particular lesson, we've been thinking about tactics to improve memory, and we've been thinking about causes of memory loss, in this case aging and amnesia caused by maybe trauma or an accident. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.